Hello again. We're going to continue with Chapter 11 and Chapter 12 in this video. Chapter 11, Parent Conference. Failure! I had hoped to hit the floor with Mr. Smith's face in my hand and Broxholm's real mug, his real face, exposed for all the world to see. Instead, I ended up with a handful of air and a bump on the head. The other kids in the class shouted and jumped to their feet. Smith or Broxholm waved them away. He told Mike Foran to go get the nurse. Then he knelt over me to see if I was all right. He was acting so tender and concerned that I almost felt bad about trying to pull off his face. But all I had to do was think of Miss Schwartz trapped in that force field in the attic, and any guilt I might have felt just floated right away. Susan, are you all right? He asked, fanning my face. I moaned and fluttered my eyes. What happened? I asked. You fainted, said Broxholm. He patted the side of my head. Almost took my ear with you. Almost took my ear with you, he added. He gave me a cute little smile that showed the dimple in his right cheek. Between the two of us, the air was thick with fake innocence. Was it really possible he didn't know what I was up to? A minute later, Mike came running back with Mrs. Glacka, puffing along behind him. She checked my pulse, felt my forehead, and then helped me to her office to, surprise, lie down. She also decided to call my mother. This meant that I had to go home, and then to the doctor's, and then spend the rest of the afternoon in bed with my mother fussing and worrying about whether or not I was about to get my first period. She even decided that I had to spend the evening in bed, too, after she brought my supper to my room. Gracious, Susan, she said when she burst through the door. This place looks like an explosion at a garage sale. Can you keep it a little neater? I was planning to clean it up today, I said, only I didn't feel up to it after I fainted. Poor baby, she said, setting the tray on my nightstand. She seemed so pleased, I decided not to tell her that I had been kidding. She never could understand that I liked my room the way it was. After supper, I slipped out of bed and went to see my father. He was sitting in his den, building a model of the Empire State Building out of toothpicks. That's his hobby, making famous buildings with toothpicks. If you ask me, he's pretty weird. But it keeps him happy, which is more than I can say for most adults that I know. So I guess I shouldn't complain. Hi, Pook, he said when I walked in. Feeling better? I nodded, not wanting to tell him I hadn't been feeling bad to begin with. I sat down next to him and started handing him toothpicks. So what's on your prepubescent mind tonight? He said, holding up a toothpick and dabbing a bit of glue onto the end of it. Dad, I said, but that was all I could think of. I tried, but I just couldn't bring myself to explain the situation. After a full minute of silence, he turned to me and said, Are you all right, Susan? I knew he was really concerned because he let the glue on the end of his toothpick dry out while he was waiting for my answer. I'm fine, I said at last. Well, not exactly fine. I've got a problem. What kind of problem? He asked. He put down his toothpick and he gave me his full attention. This was terrible. Can you imagine trying to tell your father that your teacher is an alien? He was going to think I was out of my mind. But I had to do something, so I took a deep breath and said, It's about Mr. Smith. He nodded, inviting me to continue. Look, I tried, I really did, but I just couldn't bring myself to say the words, My teacher is an alien. After a long, uncomfortable silence, I finally said, I don't think he likes me very much. Dad looked appropriately worried. Why not? He asked. Well, he shudders whenever he sees me go to my music lesson. I hoped that might sound weird enough to get him to ask another question. Come on, Dad, help me, I thought. Ask the right questions. But he just laughed. As long as Mr. Smith doesn't actually say anything, I don't think you can complain too much, he said. Maybe the guy just doesn't like music. Not everyone can be as cultured as we are, you know. He's probably just a Philistine. Yeah, I thought, a Philistine from the planet Phyllis. So a Philistine is someone who doesn't appreciate art or music. But all I said aloud was, "Yeah, a Philistine." Figuring he'd solved my problem, Dad returned back to his toothpicks. "I wouldn't let it get to you, honey," he said. "The school year's almost over, and you can tough it out until then. Now, you better scoot back to bed before your mother catches you here." I gave him a hug and trudged back to my room. Now what? If I was going to do anything about this mess, I had to get some proof, and fast. I was still trying to figure that all out when Peter called. "Nice try today," he said. "You were really brave. I just hope Broxholm didn't figure out what you were up to." Great! That was the last thing in the world I wanted to think about. "I wasn't brave," I said, "just desperate. What I want to know is what are we going to do next? We've got to find some way to prove the truth about Broxholm." "Actually, that's why I'm calling," said Peter. "I wanted to know if you had a camera." "Sure. Why?" He hesitated, then said, "Well, are you game for another expedition into Broxholm's lair?" I smiled for the first time that day. "So we can take a picture of Miss Schwartz? Peter, you're brilliant. Only, when can we be sure that he won't be there?" "How about during school?" "Peter, I can't skip school. My mother would kill me." "Would you rather get kidnapped by aliens?" he said. I sighed. "All right. I'll bring my camera to school on Monday. We'll talk about it then." I hung up and tried not to think about the fact that in 2 days I was going to go back into the aliens' den. In fact, I spent most of that whole long sleepless night trying not to think about it. Chapter 12. Things Get Weirder. I didn't think it was all that weird when Stacy Benoit called me Saturday morning to see how I was doing. After all, she's my friend, and she did think that I fainted in school the day before. I didn't realize when I laughed and told her there wasn't anything wrong with me, that I was only confirming her worst fears. I didn't figure that out until Monday morning, when our class turned into something from the Twilight Zone. Until that point, I had other things to worry about, like what to do about Miss Schwartz. Since my mother still wouldn't let me out of the house, I spent a long time discussing the force field thing with Peter over the phone. He told me he was pretty sure Miss Schwartz was actually safer inside that thing than she would be walking the streets. "She probably doesn't like it in there," he said. "I know I wouldn't, but nothing's going to hurt her." "Well, doesn't she have to eat or go to the bathroom or something?" I asked nervously. I could almost see Peter shrug over the telephone line. "I don't think so," he said. "I have a feeling time is pretty much holding still inside that thing. So unless she had to go to the bathroom when he put her in there, she's probably fine." He paused, then added, "Come to think of it, that force field could be a woman's dream. She won't age a bit." "Don't be a male chauvinist pig," I said angrily. "This is serious." "I know it's serious," snapped Peter, "but we can't do anything about it this weekend, unless you know of a time when we can be sure that Broxholm won't be there." "Well, I suppose you're right," I said. But the thought of Miss Schwartz trapped in that force field gnawed away at me for the rest of the day, and all of Sunday too. I had to get her out of there. I was still stewing about that on Monday, until things got so weird that I forgot about Miss Schwartz for a while. It started with Duncan Dougal, who walked into class carrying the biggest apple I had ever seen in my life. "Good morning, Mr. Smith," he said. "How are you today?" His voice was so syrupy sweet that it made me want to throw up. I looked away, then looked back again so fast it put a crick in my neck. "Duncan," I thought in astonishment. Duncan, the class bully, put his apple on Mr. Smith's desk, then went to his own desk, sat down, and folded his hands neatly in front of him, just like that. I squeezed my eyes shut and then opened them again to see if anything would change. But the apple was still there, and Duncan was still sitting at his desk, smiling like a little angel. What was going on here? When I opened my desk, I found a note that said, "I think you are the bravest person I have ever met." It was signed A friend. Who had it come from? And why? I looked around the room, but the others were all bent over their desks, working busily away. I turned back to my work, trying to figure out what was going on. But even the weird stuff that had happened so far hadn't prepared me for what came next. "You pig-faced baboon!" yelled a familiar voice. Stacy? Stacy Benoit? The girl most likely to be declared a saint while living? I turned around and saw Stacy standing beside her desk, shouting at Mike Ferran, the only kid I had ever heard of who never, and I mean never, got in trouble with a teacher. "Shut up!" yelled Mike. "Shut up, you creep!" When Stacy slapped him across the face, I almost fell out of my chair. Of course, Stacy couldn't slap that well, having never done it before. So it was kind of a wimpy little slap. But this was Stacy Benoit, for heaven's sakes. "Stacy!" yelled Mr. Smith, who was sitting at the back of the room with a reading group. "Michael, what is going on there?" He started for the front of the room, but he was too late. When Stacy slapped Mike, he jumped up so fast he knocked his desk over. His face was red. I didn't realize until later that it was from stage fright. Your mother wears, your mother wears... I wanted to prompt him. It was pathetic to see the nicest kid in class try to come up with a withering insult. And even more pathetic when he finally finished up with, "Your mother wears polyester!" So he was trying to offend Stacy, but he didn't think of a very good insult. But it seemed to do the trick. Stacy began to shriek in outrage. Mr. Smith reached them just in time to keep them from going for each other's throats. "The rest of you, stay in your seats," he ordered. "I'll be back in a minute." Then he walked out the door, dragging the two best-behaved kids in 6th grade along with him. They were kicking and screaming every step of the way. I closed my eyes, shook my head. I was sure I was awake. So what was going on? What? Was this the same planet I had gone to sleep on? I couldn't wait for recess so that I could talk to Peter. All right. Bye, guys.